February 24th, 1994. Gloucester, England. Police arrived at 25 Cromwell Street with a search warrant, looking for the remains of Heather West, a 16-year-old girl who disappeared in 1987. Her father, Fred West, had told neighbors she'd run away, joined a lesbian commune, become a drug addict, various stories that never quite added up. Police began digging in the back garden, and within hours they found human remains. But not just Heather's. They found bones from multiple bodies, buried in shallow graves, dismembered, some missing fingers and toes. Fred West was arrested, and he told police something that shocked even experienced detectives. There were more bodies, buried under the cellar, under the bathroom, throughout the house. Over the next month, police excavated 25 Cromwell Street and found the remains of 9 young women, plus Heather West and 2 others found at Fred's previous properties. 12 victims total, possibly more who were never found. The victims had been tortured, sexually assaulted, murdered, and buried like trash in the house where Fred and Rose West had raised 6 children, where they'd lived seemingly normal lives while running what investigators would call a house of horrors. This is the story of 2 of Britain's most evil serial killers, a couple whose depravity shocked the world, whose crimes revealed failures in the police investigations and child protection. This is the story of the victims, young women who deserved so much better than the brutal deaths they suffered. Frederick Walter Stephen West was born September 29, 1941, in Muchmarcle, Herefordshire, England, into a poor rural family with 7 children. His childhood was marked by poverty and what appears to have been sexual abuse within the family, creating a deeply disturbed individual from an early age. Fred had a serious motorcycle accident at age 17 that resulted in head injuries and a fractured skull, and some experts believe this brain damage contributed to his lack of impulse control and violent behavior. At age 19, he was accused of getting his 13-year-old sister pregnant, though charges were never filed. This pattern of sexual violence would define his entire life. In 1962, Fred married Catherine Reina Costello, a sex worker with whom he had 2 daughters, Charmaine and Anna Marie, though Charmaine was actually Reina's daughter from another relationship. The family moved frequently, and Fred began committing petty crimes and engaging in increasingly violent behavior toward Reina. In 1967, they moved to Gloucester, where Fred worked as a laborer and handyman dad. The marriage was violent and chaotic, with both parents neglecting the children and Fred beginning to sexually abuse Anna Marie when she was just 8 years old. Reina eventually left Fred, but she would return occasionally to check on the children, visits that would prove fatal. Rosemary Pauline Letts was born November 29, 1953, in Devon, England, to a violent father who suffered from schizophrenia and a depressive mother who received electroshock therapy while pregnant with Rose. Rose grew up in a household marked by mental illness and violence, developing aggressive and hypersexual behaviors from a young age that concerned teachers and social workers. At age 15, she met Fred West, who was 27, married with 2 children, and immediately began a sexual relationship with him, despite the massive age gap and his married status. Rose moved in with Fred in 1970, when she was just 16, and began caring for Charmaine and Anna Marie, while Fred was in prison for theft. In 1971, while Fred was still in prison, 8-year-old Charmaine disappeared, and Rose told neighbors the girl had gone to live with her mother. But Charmaine was dead, murdered by Rose possibly for misbehaving, or simply because Rose saw her as Fred's stepdaughter rather than a real child. When Fred was released from prison, he helped Rose bury Charmaine's body at their home. Later that same year, Rena came looking for Charmaine, and Fred murdered her, burying her body in a field. Rose was now complicit in murder, and rather than being horrified, she seemed to embrace it, finding in Fred a partner who shared her capacity for violence and sexual sadism. In 1972, Fred and Rose moved to 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, a large 3-story house that Fred could rent cheaply and renovate himself. The house would become their base of operations for the next 20 years, the place where they would commit most of their murders and bury their victims. Fred converted the cellar into a soundproof torture chamber, with hooks in the ceiling, restraints, and equipment designed for prolonged sexual abuse. Rose worked as a prostitute from the house, with Fred's encouragement and assistance, seeing clients in upstairs rooms while their children were home, creating a household steeped in sexual violence and exploitation. The first known victim murdered at Cromwell Street was Caroline Owens, a young woman Fred and Rose hired as a nanny in 1972. After she tried to leave, they kidnapped, raped, and tortured her. But unlike later victims, Caroline survived and reported the attack to police. Fred and Rose were arrested and charged with indecent assault, but incredibly, they were only fined £50 each, and Caroline's testimony about the severity of the assault was not believed. This was a catastrophic failure of the justice system that allowed Fred and Rose to continue, emboldened by the knowledge that even when caught, they faced minimal consequences. Between 1973 and 1979, Fred and Rose murdered at least 8 young women at Cromwell Street. Lucy Partington, Carol Ann Cooper, Therese Siegenthaler, Shirley Hubbard, Juanita Mott, Shirley Robinson, Allison Chambers. The victims were young women and teenage girls, often hitchhikers, runaways, or girls from troubled backgrounds who Fred and Rose befriended or offered rides to. The pattern was consistent. The victims were taken to Cromwell Street, held in the cellar, subjected to prolonged sexual torture, and then murdered when Fred and Rose tired of them or feared they might escape and report what had happened. The abuse wasn't limited to kidnapped strangers. Fred's own daughter, Anna Marie, was raped repeatedly by Fred and Rose from age 8 until she was old enough to leave home. Rose participated in the abuse, holding Anna Marie down while Fred raped her, threatening her to keep silent, normalizing horrific abuse as just part of family life. Other children in the house suffered neglect and witnessed violence, growing up in a home where the adults committed murder in the cellar while they slept upstairs. Social services were called multiple times by teachers and neighbors concerned about the children, but investigations were superficial, and the children remained in the home where horrors continued. In 1987, Fred and Rose murdered their own daughter, 16-year-old Heather West, after she threatened to tell authorities about the abuse in the household. She was buried in the back garden, and Fred told neighbors she'd run away. For the next 7 years, the Wests appeared to live normal lives, Fred working as a handyman, Rose seeing clients, the remaining children attending school. Nobody suspected that beneath their feet lay the remains of at least 12 victims. That 25 Cromwell Street was a house built on murder. That the couple living there were 2 of the most prolific serial killers in British history. The investigation that would finally expose Fred and Rose West began in 1992 when another of their children told a friend about sexual abuse in the home, and the friend told her mother, who reported it to police. Police began investigating allegations of child abuse against Fred and Rose. And during these interviews, one of the children mentioned that Heather had been murdered and buried in the garden, something the siblings had been told by Fred as a threat to keep them silent about other abuse. Police initially didn't believe this claim, thinking it was an exaggeration. But eventually, they obtained a warrant to search the property in February 1994, looking for Heather's remains. When the first body was found in the garden, Fred West was arrested and interrogated. Faced with undeniable evidence, he began confessing, though his confessions were self-serving and designed to protect Rose, claiming she knew nothing about the murders, that he had acted alone. Police didn't believe him because the evidence suggested Rose's participation, and they continued excavating the property. Each day brought new horrors. Bodies in the cellar, under the bathroom, buried throughout the house. The victims had been dismembered, and some remains showed signs of having been kept for days or weeks before burial, suggesting prolonged torture. Rose West was arrested on April 20, 1994, and charged with multiple counts of murder. She maintained her innocence, claiming she knew nothing about Fred's crimes, that she was a victim of his abuse, that he had hidden everything from her. But the evidence contradicted her claims. Survivors like Caroline Owens testified that Rose actively participated in assaults. Children testified to Rose's involvement in abuse, and forensic evidence suggested the murders required two people. The prosecution built a case showing Fred and Rose as partners in depravity, each making the other worse, each enabling and encouraging the other's most violent impulses. On January 1, 1995, while awaiting trial, Fred West hanged himself in his prison cell, leaving a note saying he loved Rose and wanted to protect her. His suicide meant he would never stand trial, never face his victims' families in court, never provide full answers about what happened to the missing women. Some believe Fred killed himself to spare Rose from prosecution, thinking that without his testimony, she might be acquitted. Others believe he couldn't face the shame of public trial, the exposure of every detail of his crimes. Either way, his death left many questions unanswered and ensured Rose would face trial alone. Rose West's trial began in October 1995 at Winchester Crown Court, one of the most sensational criminal trials in British history, with media coverage that gripped the nation. The prosecution presented testimony from survivors, from the West children, from forensic experts who described the evidence found at Cromwell Street. The defense argued Rose was a victim of Fred's coercion, that she was abused and controlled, that she couldn't have stopped his crimes. But the jury heard evidence of Rose's active participation in assaults, her violence toward children, her complicity in torture. On November 22, 1995, Rose West was convicted on 10 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in October 1996, and the site was turned into a walkway, with no memorial marking what happened there. A deliberate choice to avoid creating a macabre tourist attraction. The victims' families had mixed feelings about this decision. Some wanted the house destroyed to prevent ghoulish tourism. Others felt that erasing the site also erased memory of their loved ones. The victims deserved to be remembered not for how they died, but for who they were. Daughters, sisters, friends, young women with hopes and futures that were brutally stolen from them. The Fred and Rose West case exposed catastrophic failures in Britain's child protection and law enforcement systems. Social services visited the West home multiple times after reports of abuse and neglect. Yet children remained in that house of horrors for years. Police failed to investigate Heather West's disappearance thoroughly when she was first reported missing in 1987. The justice system gave Fred and Rose a £50 sterling fine after Caroline Owens reported a violent sexual assault, allowing them to continue hunting victims. These failures cost lives, and they prompted reforms in how British authorities handle child abuse allegations and missing persons cases. Rose West remains in HMP Newhall in West Yorkshire, one of Britain's few prisoners serving a whole life order, meaning she will never be released. She continues to maintain her innocence, claiming she was a victim of Fred and had no knowledge of his crimes, despite overwhelming evidence of her participation. She has been attacked by other prisoners multiple times, and there are reports she's deeply unpopular within the prison system. Some of the West children have written books about their experiences, trying to process the horror of being raised by serial killers. And some have spoken publicly about the importance of believing children when they report abuse. The psychological questions raised by the Fred and Rose West case continue to fascinate and horrify criminologists. How did two people find each other and enable each other's worst impulses? Neither Fred nor Rose showed signs of being solo serial killers before they met, but together they became monsters. This phenomenon of folie à deux, or shared psychosis in couples, is rare but documented, where two people feed off each other's deviance, competing to be more depraved, creating a feedback loop of escalating violence. Fred and Rose West represent one of the most extreme examples of this dynamic, a couple whose union produced evil greater than either might have achieved alone. This has been the story of Fred and Rose West, two of Britain's most notorious serial killers, who murdered at least 12 young women and girls between 1967 and 1987, burying most of them at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. The story of victims like Heather West, murdered by her own parents, and Lucy Partington, Carol Ann Cooper, and so many others who were tortured and killed for Fred and Rose's sadistic pleasure. The story of a house of horrors, where murder happened while children slept upstairs, where bodies lay beneath the floors for decades. The story of failures by police, social services, and the justice system that allowed these crimes to continue for 20 years. And the story of how Fred escaped justice through suicide, while Rose remains in prison, still claiming innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Their crimes shocked Britain and the world, reminding us that evil can hide in plain sight, that monsters can look like ordinary neighbors, and that we must